Today's article is a very strange one. It concerns a man who, in the 1950s, was overwhelmingly obsessed with a beautiful space woman who also happened to be a woman in black. That's right. She had two jobs on our planet, one to enlighten us and the other to terrorize us. Sounds strange? Yes. There's no doubt about that. With that being said, listen on. Truman Bethurum was a Californian man born in 1898 who spent much of his early years working jobs that never seemed to last. His first marriage both began and crumbled during the Second World War. He entered into a second marriage only several months after the war ended and ultimately wound up working out in the harsh, hot deserts of Nevada, specifically in the highway construction game. It was while Bethurum was out in the desert in 1952, and while his second wife, Mary, was stuck at home in Santa Barbara, that Bethurum claimed he had an extremely close encounter with extraterrestrials on Mormon Mesa, a near 2,000-foot high mount in Nevada's Moapa Valley. On the fateful night in question, and after the working day was over, Bethurum climbed the mountain primarily in search for shells, something that Mary particularly enjoyed collecting. The story goes on that Bethurum was rendered into a strange, altered state of mind, during which aliens from another world suddenly manifested before him, having arrived in a huge gleaming flying saucer that quietly descended to the desert floor. Although only around 4 to 5 feet in height, the aliens were eerily human-looking and claimed to come from a faraway planet called Clarion. Not only that, their leader was a captain, Aurora Rains, a shapely woman that the near-salivating Bethurum described as being, quote, tops in shapelessness and beauty, end quote. All thoughts of Mary, back in Santa Barbara, were suddenly gone from Bethurum's mind. Bethurum's odd story continued and grew at a steady and controversial pace, as did his relationship to the flirty Captain Rains. For months, Bethurum and Rains had clandestine meetings, usually late at night. They generally occurred in isolated desert locations in Nevada, where after Rains' huge ship landed, the pair had long and deep conversations about the state of the Earth, the Cold War, and the captain's home world, to which she promised to take Bethurum one day. While Bethurum did not explicitly say so, there are more than a few nuggets of data in Bethurum's collective works that suggest, on a couple of occasions, the pair had just about the closest and most intimate encounters of all. It's hardly surprising, then, that many students of ufology outright dismiss Bethurum's story as either a hoax or a fantasy, born out of Bethurum's unhappiness with both wife number 1 and 2. Eventually, there would be a wife number 3. There is, however, one particularly fascinating aspect of Bethurum's claimed experiences that has a significant bearing upon the matter of the woman in black. On 2 occasions, Bethurum said he had encountered Aurora Rains under circumstances very different to those which occurred out in the desert with Rains' huge flying saucer and her crew of little men in view. These additional encounters saw Rains operating in what can only be termed disguise. In fact, in definitive woman in black mode, there was nothing flirty or friendly about these close encounters, however. They were downright hostile. The first occurred around 3 a.m., a time when a wealth of supernatural activity typically occurs. One August 1952 morning, Bethurum and a work friend, Whitty, had just finished their shift and decided to head off in Whitty's pickup truck to a favorite all-night diner in Glendale, Nevada. Whitty was someone who Bethurum had quietly confided in about his experiences with Aurora Rains. He was also someone who, although fascinated by Bethurum's claims, was somewhat skeptical of the story. That is, until they entered the diner. Any skepticism Whitty had was very soon to be wiped out. As the pair sat, a noticeably quiet Whitty elbowed Bethurum in the ribs and motioned him to take a look at the end of the counter. Bethurum looked up. He was amazed and shocked to see Aurora Rains and an equally small male individual standing there. Quote, "It's her, isn't it?" asked Whitty. Bethurum nodded, pretty much in a state of near shock. Both men watched carefully as Rains and her colleagues took seats at the window table. In stark contrast to everyone else in the diner, Rains was dressed in black, a black beret, wraparound black sunglasses, black velvet blouse, and black boots. The only thing that wasn't black, a glaring red skirt, Just a couple of weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon, Bethurum was having his hair trimmed at a barber shop in Las Vegas when he caught sight of Aurora Raines yet again. This time, she was walking along a sidewalk outside the barber's, wearing her same outfit of black sunglasses, black beret, black blouse, and a red skirt. Bethurum particularly threw his dollars and coins at the astonished barber and raced out of the door. Quote, "Lady, lady!" cried Bethurum. As he caught sight of Raines about 60 feet ahead of him, she quickly turned, looked directly at him. Despite the fact that the street was crowded and the shout could have come from any number of dozens of people on the sidewalk, she slowly shook her head. The stone-cold look on her face was one of pure evil. Bethurum got the message as Raines vanished into the crowd. And now here's the actual account, word for word, in narrative form, from Truman Bethurum himself. In July 1952, I was employed in Nevada on Highway 91, and about 70 or 80 miles out of Las Vegas towards Salt Lake City. I had been transferred from day to night shift. We worked from 4 p.m. until sometimes 8 a.m. the following morning. My job was to keep 4 water trucks operating, hauling water from the muddy river and the 2 reservoirs out in the desert for daytime sprinkling on the highway construction. Soon after going on the job, some fellow workers told me that the entire Mesa area had been covered by ocean. There were seashells to prove it. So one night, late in July, after I was sure everything was functioning properly, I had asked and received permission to visit the Mesa area to get some shell souvenirs. I had a flashlight along and used it some, but didn't find what I was after. It was about 3:30 a.m. when I left my job site, driving and walking possibly an hour or so. I headed my 4-wheel drive Army carry-all truck into the northeast and decided to take a short nap, realizing the first gleam of daylight would awake me. I had been asleep possibly a half hour or slightly more when I was rudely awakened by what would best be described as mumbling, low talking in an unintelligible tongue. My first thought was that my boss and someone were playing a trick because of finding me asleep. But as I raised my head, I quickly discovered this was not the case. About 8 small-sized men were in a semicircle in front and to the right side of my truck, approximately 8 to 10 feet away, and apparently as curious as I was. My thought was to get away fast, although I would have had to back around. As I raised up to see better, one of the men took a couple of steps forward toward me and said something rather low and still unintelligible to me. I shook my head to indicate that I did not understand. He came quickly back with, quote, "You name it," end quote. Quote, "My God," I said, "you can speak English too?" End quote. Quote, "We have no difficulty with any language," end quote, he returned. These fellows seemed to be of Latin extraction from their appearance. My heart was thumping, I guess from fear and excitement. At that instant I decided to get out of my truck and shake hands for a friendly gesture. As I turned to get out, I saw 75 yards away a monstrous disc-shaped flying saucer, about 300 feet in diameter and roughly 18 feet deep. Then I wondered for a split second if it could be a movie prop. But as I had been above looking down only a short time before, I realized this could not be the case. As I reached out my hand to shake hands, it seemed like a military maneuver, the way they lined up as each seemed anxious to grasp my hand. Only one made any attempt to talk to me or answer my questions. They never asked me a single question, and it appeared to me to be a military-type outfit they were wearing, and also the way they fell into line to shake my hand. Quote, "Do you have a captain?" I asked. Quote, "Sure." Quote, "Could I speak to him, please?" Quote, "Surest thing, you know," he replied, and he took hold of my right arm above the elbow with his left hand, with a terribly hard squeeze that did not ease my mind any. Then I asked if they were from some European country. Quote, "No," he said. "Our homes are in faraway lands." End quote. As I had asked about speaking to their captain, I noticed a smile on some faces that made me think, well, this is it, and no one will ever know what happened to me. He said, quote, "You may speak to our captain in our scow," end quote. Quote, "What a name for a thing like that," I thought. This man almost spun me around and started for the saucer, which seemed to be floating about 4 to 5 feet off the ground. As we neared it, it settled to just a few inches above the ground and tilted down on the near side at the same time. There was just one step and a single hand rail on the right side of the opening. He almost bounced me to the rim of the saucer. He had released the extreme pressure on my arm, but still had a firm grip. I was at least a foot taller than he, and I weighed approximately 180. We went downhill inside about 50 feet, and he again swung me around to the left, through a door-like opening, to room about 10 to 12 feet, and fitted like a combined office and lounge. I think my eyes were fairly popped when I saw that their captain was a gorgeous woman, shorter than any of the men, neatly attired, and almost having a Latin appearance, coal black hair and olive complexion. She appeared to be about 42 years of age. She stood up and smiled. The man released my arm immediately. I turned to say something to him, but he had disappeared instantly. As I again faced this lady, I could not for the life of me think of a single thing to say. After a couple of seconds, she again smiled and said, quote, "Speak up, friend. You're not hexed," end quote. After talking and asking questions for about a half an hour, I realized they were definitely not Europeans. She did not tell me her name or the name of their planet at that time, just leaving me with the knowledge that they traveled interplanetarily and were wise to everything going on all over the world, and other planets also. She seemed friendly and anxious to talk, etc. About the only questions asked of me was what I call the area, which was Mormon Mesa, Nevada. She later told me her name was Aurora Rains, and their home planet was Clarion. She said Clarion was definitely not a planet known by some other name, and gave me her reasons. I had decided not to tell anyone regarding this episode, as I knew I would be called a liar. But upon returning to my job shortly after sunrise, my boss said, quote, "Did Joe's plane come down out there where you were, out of gas?" End quote. "No," I told him. Quote, "Did a commercial airliner land out there? Near you?" he asked. Another no was my answer. Finally, in desperation, he said, quote, "I could see something come down out there, and there was no noise. Now, if it wasn't Joe's plane, what was it?" End quote. When I finally broke down and told him, I just got the wicked eye treatment, and as the news spread around, I was walked around, etc. Before they left, she escorted me to the outside and told me they would come again. She said, "Just think of the place and day. I've seen them 11 times altogether, the last on November 2nd, 1952. At that time, she said, we will see you again, possibly next month. I was in the general area until March of 1953 and have not seen anything of them or any signs that might indicate even a falling star in the skies." So it wasn't long before Captain Rains was gone, back to her own world of Clarion. Of course, the story of Truman Bethurum and of the one woman with two distinct characters and appearances stretches credulity to the absolute max. Nevertheless, truth, hoax, or something weirder, there's no doubt that those encounters with Rains changed Bethurum's character and life. His beautiful space girl vanished, but Bethurum spent the rest of his life writing books on UFOs, giving lectures, and telling anyone who would listen about the woman who left him behind. Or was it two women? Extraterrestrial twins, maybe? We'll never know.